Thomas Whitmore had everything money could buy. At 58, he owned half the commercial properties in downtown Chicago. His mansion had 12 bedrooms, 3 swimming pools, and a wine cellar that could host 50 guests. But on that Tuesday morning in late September, none of it mattered. His grandson, little Benjamin, just 4 months old, lay limp in his daughter Catherine's arms. The baby's lips had turned an alarming shade of blue. His tiny chest barely moved. Catherine, 32 and normally so composed, was sobbing uncontrollably. "Father, he's not breathing right," she cried out. "Something's terribly wrong." Thomas immediately called his personal physician, Dr. Raymond Chen. Within 20 minutes, Dr. Chen arrived with his medical bag, his face grave as he examined the infant. He shook his head slowly. "Mr. Whitmore, this is beyond my expertise. The baby needs specialists. Immediately." Thomas didn't hesitate. He made call after call. By noon, 9 of the finest doctors in Chicago had gathered in his mansion-esque guest suite, which had been transformed into a makeshift emergency room. There was Dr. Patricia Morrison, chief of pediatrics at Northwestern; Dr. James Sullivan, a renowned cardiologist; Dr. Helen Zhang, who trained at Johns Hopkins. Each one examined Benjamin with furrowed brows and hushed consultations. The baby was choking. Something was lodged deep in his throat, but it was positioned in such a way that traditional methods weren't working. The Heimlich maneuver for infants had failed. The doctors tried specialized instruments, but the baby's airway was too small, too delicate. "We need to get him to the hospital," Dr. Morrison finally said. "We need an operating room." But Catherine's husband, Robert, a physician himself, shook his head grimly. "He won't make it through the transport. Look at him. We have maybe minutes." The room fell silent. Thomas Whitmore, a man who'd never known helplessness, felt his world crumbling. All his wealth, all his connections, and he couldn't save his own grandson. That's when they heard footsteps on the marble stairs. 12-year-old Maya Johnson hadn't meant to come upstairs. She was the daughter of Clara Johnson, who'd been the Whitmore family's housekeeper for 15 years. Maya sometimes came along during school breaks, usually staying in the kitchen doing homework while her mother worked. But she'd heard the commotion, the crying, the urgent voices. And Maya was a curious child, always had been. More than that, she had a good heart. She appeared in the doorway of the guest suite, her hair pulled back in 2 ponytails, wearing a simple pink dress that her mother had sewn for her birthday. Her brown eyes widened as she took in the scene: the 9 doctors in their professional attire, the crying mother, the wealthy grandfather with his head in his hands, and the tiny baby struggling for breath. "Maya!" Her mother's voice came from behind her. "You shouldn't be up here, sweetheart. Come away." But Maya didn't move. She stared at the baby, and something clicked in her mind. A memory from 3 months ago. Her little cousin, Dante, had choked on a piece of candy at a family barbecue. Maya had been the only one nearby. Panicked, scared, she'd remembered something her teacher had shown them in health class just days before. She'd laid Dante face down across her lap, supported his head carefully, and given him 5 quick back blows between his shoulder blades. The candy had popped out. Dante had cried, then laughed, then asked for more hot dogs. Maya looked at the baby now, at little Benjamin turning blue, at all these fancy doctors with their fancy equipment, standing around looking defeated. "I can help," she said quietly. The room turned to look at her. Thomas Whitmore barely registered her presence. Dr. Morrison started to wave her away. But Catherine, desperate and drowning in mother's intuition, saw something in the young girl's eyes. "Let her try, Catherine," whispered. "Catherine, she's a child," Robert began. "Let her try." Catherine's voice cracked with desperate hope. Maya walked forward on shaking legs. The doctors parted, uncertain, some looking skeptical, others simply too exhausted to protest. Maya's hands trembled as she gently took the baby from Catherine's arms. "I learned this in school," Maya said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "You have to be very gentle with babies." She carefully positioned Benjamin face down along her forearm, supporting his head with her hand. His little body was so light, so fragile. She could feel 9 pairs of professional eyes boring into her back, could hear Clara praying softly in the doorway. Maya took a breath, then another. She placed her other hand between Benjamin's shoulder blades and gave 5 quick but gentle strikes, just as she'd been taught. Nothing happened. The room held its collective breath. Maya adjusted her position slightly, remembering what her teacher had said about the angle being important. She tried again. 5 more careful back blows. A tiny sound. A cough. Then suddenly, a small plastic toy wheel shot out of Benjamin's mouth and clattered onto the marble floor. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Benjamin drew in a long, shuddering breath. His chest rose. He let out a piercing wail, the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. Catherine burst into fresh tears, but these were tears of relief and joy. She gathered Benjamin into her arms, covering his little face with kisses. Robert stood frozen, his medical mind trying to process what had just happened. The 9 doctors looked at each other in astonishment. Thomas Whitmore stared at the young girl in the pink dress, this child who'd done what 9 of the best doctors in Chicago couldn't do. Maya stood there, her hands still shaking, tears rolling down her own cheeks. Clara rushed forward and wrapped her daughter in her arms. "You saved him," Clara whispered. "Oh, Maya, you saved him." Later that evening, after the doctors had left, after Benjamin had been thoroughly examined and declared perfectly healthy, Thomas Whitmore found Maya in the kitchen. She was sitting at the small table, drawing pictures with some crayons her mother kept there for her. Thomas pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. He was quiet for a long moment, this powerful man who always knew what to say in boardrooms and negotiations. "Maya," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "How did you know what to do?" Maya looked up from her drawing. "My teacher, Mrs. Patterson, she taught us. She said you never know when you might need to help someone. She made us all practice on dolls." Maya paused. "I was scared I'd do it wrong, but I was more scared of not trying." Thomas felt something break open in his chest. Here was this child from a family with so little, who'd learned a simple skill in a public school classroom, who'd had the courage to step forward when everyone else had stepped back. "You gave my family back our future today," Thomas said quietly. "How can I ever thank you?" Maya shrugged. "The way children do. I just did what Mrs. Patterson taught me." But Thomas Whitmore was thinking deeper thoughts. He was thinking about all the money he'd spent on exclusive doctors, elite hospitals, private schools for his own children and grandchildren. He was thinking about teachers like Mrs. Patterson, working in underfunded schools, teaching life-saving skills to children like Maya. He was thinking about courage and compassion, and the things that truly mattered. The next day, Thomas made a phone call to the superintendent of Maya's school district, then another to the City Board of Education. By the end of the week, he'd established a fund to provide health and safety training to every public school in Chicago. He insisted it be called the Patterson-Johnson Initiative, after Maya's teacher and Maya herself. But more than that, something had shifted in Thomas Whitmore's heart. He'd spent his whole life building walls, between himself and people he considered beneath his station, between his wealth and the world outside his mansion gates. That wall had almost cost him everything. Clara continued working as his housekeeper, but now Maya was invited to the mansion not as someone to be tolerated in the kitchen, but as an honored guest. Thomas found himself looking forward to her visits. She'd tell him about school, about her friends, about the books she was reading. She had a way of seeing the world that reminded him of simpler times, of what mattered. Catherine became close with Clara, 2 mothers bonded by the miracle that had saved Benjamin's life. She learned that Clara was taking night classes to become a nurse, that she dreamed of owning her own small home someday. Catherine found ways to help that didn't feel like charity, but like friendship. Years passed, as they do. Benjamin grew into a healthy, rambunctious little boy who loved to hear the story of how Maya saved my life from anyone who would tell it. Maya herself grew too, into a bright, compassionate teenager with dreams of becoming a teacher, just like Mrs. Patterson. On Maya's 18th birthday, Thomas Whitmore did something unexpected. He'd set up a full scholarship for her college education, but he did more than that. He sat down with her in his study, the same room where he'd made millions in business deals, and told her something he'd never told anyone. "Maya, you taught me something that day you saved Benjamin. You taught me that the most important things in life can't be bought. Courage, kindness, the willingness to help when everyone else stands frozen. These are the things that matter. These are the things worth passing on." He paused, his eyes misty with the wisdom of age. "I've made a lot of money in my life. I've achieved what the world calls success. But I was poor in the things that truly count. You showed me that real wealth isn't in bank accounts, it's in the goodness we carry in our hearts and share with others." Maya, mature beyond her years, smiled gently. "My mama always says we're all rich in different ways. You gave my mama a steady job when she needed it most. You treated her with respect. That meant the world to us." Thomas nodded slowly. "Your mama is a wise woman. I just wish I'd learned these lessons earlier in life." "It's never too late," Maya said. "That's what Mrs. Patterson always told us. It's never too late to learn, never too late to change, never too late to do good." The story of Maya and Benjamin became something of a legend in Chicago. Not because it made the newspapers, Thomas had ensured their privacy, but because it rippled out in quiet ways. Teachers like Mrs. Patterson continued teaching life-saving skills, knowing they mattered. Parents made sure their children learned first aid. People remembered that heroism doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in small hands willing to help. On Benjamin's 10th birthday, the family gathered for a celebration at the mansion. Maya was there, now a college student studying education. Clara was there too, having just graduated from nursing school. Catherine and Robert were there with Benjamin and his little sister, Emma. Thomas Whitmore, now 68 and silver-haired, looked around at the people gathered in his home. Not guests, not employees, family, real family, built not on blood or money, but on gratitude, respect, and love. Benjamin ran up to Maya, as he always did at gatherings, and threw his arms around her. "Maya, did you know you're my hero?" Maya laughed and hugged him back. "You're pretty heroic yourself, Ben. It takes courage to keep living and loving after a scary thing happens." Thomas watched this exchange, and he felt it again. That crack in his chest, now a warm opening where light poured through. He'd spent the first 58 years of his life building an empire, but the last 10 years he'd been building something better, a legacy of kindness. As the party wound down and the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Thomas stood on his terrace with Maya. She was looking out at the city, at the twinkling lights coming on in neighborhoods rich and poor. "Do you ever think about that day?" Thomas asked her. Maya nodded. "Sometimes, but mostly I think about what came after, how one small action can change everything, how we're all connected in ways we don't always see." "You changed my life," Thomas said simply. "No," Maya replied with gentle wisdom. "You were ready to change. I just gave you a reason to start." And in that moment, as the stars began to appear overhead, Thomas Whitmore understood the deepest truth, that 9 doctors with all their expertise couldn't do what one brave child with a good heart could do. Not because knowledge doesn't matter, but because sometimes courage and compassion matter more. Sometimes the unthinkable thing isn't a complicated procedure or an expensive treatment. Sometimes the unthinkable thing is simply to try, to care enough to step forward, to use whatever small gifts we have in service of life. And that lesson, Thomas knew, was worth more than all the money in the world.